Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
After the separation, the husband accepted it, but he couldn't forget it. Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. All I can say, Jack, is that I won't wait for you. If you do, don't expect me to be here when you get home. I sat across the table from Betty and made a decision that changed my life. Your choice, Betty. So be it, I said, then stood up from the table and walked away, leaving her sitting there. 24 hours later, I signed the papers, and 2 days after that, I was on a Greyhound bus heading to Fort Knox, Kentucky. I remembered that I hadn't told my mom where I left the car keys. So, when the bus stopped in Marysville to pick up passengers, I called home to tell my mother where to find them. While I was talking to her on the phone, she asked, "Why did you leave without saying goodbye to Betty? The poor girl was with us and crying because you just got up and left." I didn't have to say goodbye to her. She already said goodbye to me, I replied. The look on her face and the tone of her voice when she looked me in the eyes and told me she wouldn't wait was as clear as saying goodbye. I'm sure you misunderstood her, Jack. I don't think so, Mom. We need to go, the bus is getting ready to leave. During the trip to Fort Knox, I thought about what brought me to that gray bus seat. At school, I was an indifferent student. I wasn't stupid, I just didn't like school. I didn't see the point in some of the things they tried to put into my head, so I mostly ignored them. I did just enough to maintain a GPA that allowed me to play football, baseball, and basketball. I wasn't particularly good at any of these sports, just average or maybe a little above average. I was good enough to be a starter on the collegiate team, and I had my moments, but I never reached a level where I could even remotely consider the pros. Hell, I was never at the level to qualify for an athletic scholarship. I played because I loved to play, not because I expected anything from it other than the pure enjoyment of the game. Betty Gifford and I started dating in 10th grade. I had known her since 5th grade, but we were only classmates who knew each other. She was a beautiful girl, but the truth was, I thought she was too far out of my league and never worked up the courage to approach her. She was the daughter of the richest man in the city, and I was the son of a factory foreman. There was nothing wrong with being a foreman in a factory, we were just in completely different social circles. She swam in the pool at the country club, and I swam in the pool at the YMCA. She went to dinner with her parents at the Elgin Quinn Club or the Imperial Dining Club. When I went out with my parents, it was to the Village Inn on Wilcox or the Denny's on Perry Street. Her parents gave her a new Audi and a couple of gas credit cards when she got her driver's license. My parents and grandparents got together and gave me a 10-year-old Chevy pickup truck and told me I needed to get a part-time job to pay for insurance, license plates, and gas. Socially, we were like oil and water, and everyone knows the two don't mix. I doubt I would ever have gone near her if she hadn't come to me. It was a Thursday, and I was in the school cafeteria at lunchtime when Betty walked up to my table and asked if she could join me. Of course, I said yes, and she sat down. She got straight to the point. Who are you going to take to the dance tomorrow night? I wasn't planning on going, but you were planning on going before you and Judy broke up, right? Judy was my ex-girlfriend. We had dated for a little over 9 months. She canceled our date because relatives were visiting from out of town and she needed to stay home and spend time with them. I found out that she canceled our date to go out with another guy, and last Wednesday, I pretty publicly called her a cheater and broke up with her. As Betty suggested, Judy was supposed to be my date to the dance. With Judy gone, I intended to skip the dance. I told Betty this, and then she said, "I really wanted to go to this dance, but I need a date, and you're the only guy I know who isn't already taken. Do you need a companion? What about your boyfriend? Why don't you go with Roger? I thought you knew. I know that the guy you broke up with Judy over was Roger. I did the same thing to him that you did to Judy. Do you really want to go to the dance with me, since I'm here asking?" There's an old saying, "Don't look a gift horse in the mouth," I said with a smile. "So, I'll be glad to be your companion." We had a great time, although Roger and Judy came to the dance alone and shot dirty looks at Betty and me the entire evening. They hadn't danced together, not once, and seemed to stay as far away from each other as possible. This amused Betty and me terribly. As I walked Betty to her door, she thanked me for taking her, said she had a great time, and kissed me on the cheek. I was on cloud nine as I walked back to my car. I considered that night a gift from the gods, but I still thought that Betty was too far out of my league. So when I woke up on Saturday morning, I continued to live my life. A week passed, and on Friday, I was in the dining room again when Betty came to my table and sat down. Once again, she got straight to the point. "Why didn't you call me?" "Why did I have to call you? Are you saying you didn't enjoy our date the night of the dance?" "Of course not," I replied. "I had a great time." "Then why didn't you call me to set up a second date?" If she could be straightforward and frank, then so could I. "I didn't think you were expecting this. I thought the only reason we met that night was that you needed someone to take you to the dance, and I was the only one available. In fact, as far as I remember, your exact words were, 'I need a companion, and you are the only guy I know who isn't already taken.' I thought that I was just a means to an end. It never occurred to me that you might expect something more. When a girl kisses a guy goodbye after thanking him for a good time, she expects to be invited back. What are you doing tonight?" "No plans." "Pick me up at 6 o'clock. I picked her up that night at 6 o'clock, and thus began a relationship that lasted until graduation and the night she said she wouldn't wait for me. Like any relationship, there were ups and downs, but the UPS far outweighed the downs. Betty was 3 months older than me, and she was already talking about getting married right after college. Hey, I was for it, but I knew it wouldn't work. First, instead of going to a small college in our hometown, she was going to a college in another state, 900 miles from home. It was far enough away that it was almost impossible to come home for the weekend. We would probably only see each other on holidays and other breaks. Add to this the fact that there was no way a girl like Betty wouldn't attract attention and be surrounded by admirers, and it was inevitable that she would date and perhaps meet someone she liked better than Jack Bailey. And, of course, her parents would like it more. I shouldn't have said that. I think her mother loved me, but her father made it clear when we first met that he considered me completely unsuitable for his daughter. And if I'm honest with myself, I sometimes thought that was my biggest attraction to Betty, the fact that she was with me despite him. Honestly, even though I wished it had been different, I didn't see a future for Betty and me. Graduation came, and for Betty, it meant summer break before going to college. But for me, it meant getting a full-time job and starting my adult life. I discovered that there were plenty of jobs available for recent high school graduates. Unfortunately, they were all low-paid and dead-end: McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and at least 15 gas station or store clerk jobs. After 3 weeks of searching and getting nowhere, I was having lunch with Uncle Bob and complaining about the lack of a decent job when he said, "Why don't you join the military? You could learn a trade and take advantage of their educational benefits. Who knows, you might even like it enough to decide to make it your career." That same day, I spoke with an Army recruiter who explained to me what the Army could do for me and what my options were. I thanked him for his time and left his office to think about it. I discussed this with my father since he was a veteran, and after talking with him and thinking about it for a long time, I decided to do it. The next day, I had a date with Betty. After the movie, we went to the Village Inn for cake and coffee. I told her everything as it was. My job prospects are terrible, and I don't see how I can earn enough to support us when we get married. I explained what the Army could do for me. You'll basically be out for the next 4 years. By the time you graduate, my contract will be up, and I'll be back home, hoping to find a decent job that can support us. But we won't see each other for 3 years. Sure, we'll see each other. I'll have 30 days off every year, and I can get other days off. I can get 3 days off, and they have something called route delay, which gives you extra time to go from one post to another. I think we'll see each other as much as we would if I worked at Burger King and waited for you to come home for the weekend or holidays. But if I did that, I wouldn't get ahead and still couldn't provide for us as a married couple. Let your father get you a job at the factory. He can't. Business is slow there right now, and there may be layoffs soon. Well, I don't like it, Jack. I don't want you to do it. I have to do this, Betty. It's the only way I see to get what I need to give us some kind of future. All I can say, Jack, is that I won't wait for you. If you do, don't expect me to be here when you get home. As soon as she said that, I realized that even if I stayed, we still had no future. I mean, What the hell? The girl who claimed to love me so much that she couldn't live without me was now plainly telling me not to expect her to wait for me. It certainly showed a lot of love. I got off the bus and followed the signs directing recruits where to go. 2 hours later, 6 others and I were in a truck heading to Fort Knox. I was in pretty good physical shape from the sports I played, so the physical part of the workout was easy for me. Where I didn't shine was in all the tests designed to determine where I fit best in the Army. I should have paid more attention in school to subjects that I considered useless in real life. Initial tests showed the Army didn't think I was cut out for combat, so I was sent to 8 weeks of basic training instead of the 16-week program that would have included the Advanced Infantry Training course. In short, I found myself assigned to the Quartermaster Corps. I had a 10-day delay on my route when I left Knox bound for Fort Lee in Virginia. Of course, I went home to visit my mom. She said I should call Betty since I was home, but I told her I didn't want to hurt myself that much. I spent the first 2 days at home with my parents, but on the third day, I went out to meet old friends. I met up with a few, and since it was Saturday night, we decided to go to the dance at the VFW. Their Saturday dances were open to anyone who could pay the $20 entrance fee, and they usually had pretty good bands. The entry fee was waived for unmarried girls, so there were usually plenty of girls to dance with. As you might have guessed, one of the first girls I saw when I walked in was Betty. I was surprised to see her there because I expected her to be at school. I found out later that she was on a semester break. She was on the dance floor with Norm Taylor. It was predictable. Taylor was an arrogant jerk, and I could never stand him. We even fought a few times, the last time being when he tried to woo Betty while she was dating me. I don't think Betty saw me come in. If she did, she would have noticed the expression of disgust on my face. My group found an empty table, and we sat down, starting to look around the place for girls. I saw a few that I knew. One of them was Nancy Newbert, and she waved to me. I waved back and decided to ask her to dance when the next tune started. The song ended, and I saw Betty and Taylor holding hands and walking toward a booth on the north wall. They sat down and held hands on the table. Well, at least she was honest when she said she wouldn't wait. The next tune was a waltz, and I approached Nancy and asked her to dance. She agreed. On my second lap around the dance floor, as I passed Betty's booth, I saw her look up. Our eyes met, and her face lost all color as we walked past the booth. Nancy didn't notice Betty's expression, but she did notice that I ignored Betty. I didn't smile at her when she looked at me, as I usually did with friends. Nancy said, "I heard that you broke up with Betty, but no one knows why. No one knows if it's just a fight that you'll work out and get back together or not. We won't get back together. Okay, maybe now I'll have a chance." A chance? Why the hell would you want a chance with me? Don't underestimate yourself, Jack. Lots of girls would love to have a chance with you. You just didn't notice because you were so into Betty. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I'm a girl who gets what she wants, Jack. There's an empty table over there, she pointed to it. I'll leave my group if you leave yours. Jack is agile. Jack is fast. Jack took advantage of the opportunity. We spent the next 2 hours dancing, talking, and sipping our drinks. From where we sat, I could see Betty, and she could see Nancy and me. I noticed that when she wasn't dancing with Taylor, she was looking in our direction. I don't know if Taylor knew about this since his back was turned to us. Nancy and I had just finished two-stepping. After I walked her back to our table, I left her to go to the men's room. After I finished, I walked out into the hallway and saw Betty standing there, waiting for me. As usual, she got straight to the point. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you let me know you were back home? Why should I bother? You told me you wouldn't wait, and I noticed you were at least honest about it. But with Taylor, the guy I beat up because he called you, it's just a date, Jack. There's nothing between us. Judging by the way you were dancing when I walked in and the way you were holding hands in the booth, there's no way you could prove that to me. Regardless, I need to get back to my date. She's not your date. She got here hours before you. That was then. This is now. I started to walk away, and she said, "Call me, Jack." Please. Maybe, I said over my shoulder. And maybe not, I said to myself while going back to Nancy. I thought it was clear that Betty wanted to make peace, but it was also clear that she wasn't going to sit around while I was gone. I didn't see the point in setting myself up for failure, if you know what I mean. As I sat down at the table, Nancy said, "I saw Betty intercept you. Is she trying to interfere in my case?" "It's your business." "I already told you, honey. I go after what I want, and I want you." I've always been honest with myself, and I knew I wasn't that special, so Nancy's interest in me seemed strange. But she was a cute girl, and I wasn't dumb, so of course I decided to take advantage of it. We spent another half-hour dancing, and then the last call was announced, so we got ready to leave. While we were walking out together, I happened to see the expression on Betty's face. She was clearly unhappy. We stopped at the Waffle House for coffee and an early breakfast. We made plans for the next day, and then I walked her home. I received a nice kiss as I walked her to the door, and I drove home in a pretty good mood. My date with Nancy included dinner and a movie, followed by pie and coffee at the Village Inn. After the show, we were talking, and Nancy wanted to know why Betty and I weren't together anymore. I told her why and then explained my opinion. I didn't expect her answer. "What did you expect, Jack? She's young and not ready to live like a nun. She'll want to go out and have fun, and for girls our age, that fun will naturally include guys. Answer me this question, Nancy, what did you do last night?" "I had fun, yes, but with whom?" "You know who, Jack. You studied with all of us. So, you went out with Carol, Bev, and Liz to have fun. Do you do this often?" "Once a week, usually on weekends." I thought they had a great time. They were on the dance floor most of the evening. "And so, you were able to have a fun evening without being on a date with guys. Are you telling me that Betty couldn't have done the same during the time we would have spent apart? Remember, even if I stayed here, we would still have spent most of the next 4 years apart because of her schooling 900 miles away. I'm not stupid, Nancy. I know she'll want to date and go out and have fun, but you can do that without getting into a serious relationship. She said she wouldn't wait for me, but she expected me to wait for her while she was studying for 4 years. I would only see her on rare weekends, holidays, and maybe part of her summer vacation. Is this different from waiting for me to come home on vacation or for a 3 or 4 day pass? In the end, she said she wouldn't wait for me, and she didn't. I haven't been away for 3 months, and I come to the VFW and find her with her head on Taylor's shoulder. So don't tell me I was wrong to break up with her. Her relationship. I think I can understand both sides, but be honest with me, Jack. I know you and Betty had a night, and once people our age get a taste of intimate, we want more and more. Do you really think that Betty could live without this for 4 years? Could you? Other people did it. My grandmother did it while my grandfather was at the front in World War II. My mother did it while my father was in Vietnam. The point is, she wouldn't have to go for years without intim. She would have to go without it only when we were apart. Beating a dead horse, if I stayed home, I would have to go without intim while she was at school. It would be unpleasant, but I could handle it. If she really wanted to be mine, she could do it while she was in school. Anyway, for me, this is a dead topic. She made her choice, and I moved on with my life. I can't say I'm upset about it because it gives me a chance. I guess the next question is, do I have a chance? You have a chance, but you need to know what you're getting into. I'll be here for 4 more days, and then I have to report to Fort Lee. I'll be there for 10 weeks before I can go home, and even then, I don't know for how long. It could be another delay on the route to my next duty station, or it could be a vacation of 5 or 10 days. I don't know now whether you can handle a long-distance relationship for the 3 years of my contract. Betty can, because she claimed that she loved me and even talked about marriage before my call. You and I don't have such a deep connection yet. Maybe not, but we have 4 days to try to build it. When I brought her home, she came close to me and kissed me. Before I walked her to the door, we made a date for the next evening. On Monday morning, I woke up late. It was 7:30, which may not seem late to some, but it was late to me. As for the last 3 months, every day had started at 4 in the morning when the barracks lights came on and the sergeant yelled, "Drop your toys and grab your socks." I had breakfast with Mom and Dad, and after Dad left for work, Mom told me that Betty had called. I shrugged and said nothing. You need to talk to her, Jack. Why? She was pretty clear in what she said before I left. Maybe she realized she made a mistake. Maybe when you left, she realized what she had lost. It won't hurt you if you talk to her, Jack. Okay, Mom, I'll call her. She got up, came over, and brought me the phone. I looked at her, and she said, "Do it now before you change your mind." No thanks. I have a date this afternoon, and I want to be in a good mood. I feel like talking to Betty might not keep me in a good mood. I'll call her tomorrow. I had a great time with Nancy. When she asked if I would see her the next day, I said I probably wouldn't and explained why. I expect to be in a depressed mood, and I don't want to force it on you. Nonsense. It will be my job to cheer you up. If she didn't care, I didn't see why I should. So we set up a date for the next day. I woke up at 5, got dressed, and went for a run. I ran 5 miles before I got home, showered, and went downstairs to make myself breakfast. Mom was in the kitchen and told me she had saved breakfast for me, so I sat down and ate it. Mom kept looking at me, then at the phone, and then back at me. I took the hint and told her that I intended to talk to Betty. I finished breakfast, picked up the phone, and called Betty at home. Her father answered the phone, and when I asked for Betty, he asked who was calling. I told him, "Why don't you leave her alone? Haven't you heard her enough?" I lost my composure. To hell with you, old man. I didn't do anything to her except ask her to understand my situation, and she said she didn't care. She asked me to call her, and I did. If you don't want her to talk to me, just hang up and explain it to her yourself. Now, will you bring her or not? I heard him shout, "Betty, get on the phone." A few seconds later, I heard, "Hello. You wanted me to call. So what do you want?" "We should meet and talk." "Jack, why? You've clearly moved on. So what's there to talk about?" "We need to talk about ourselves. There's no us, Betty. You ended us when you straight up said you wouldn't wait for me. You put an end to that when I saw you with Taylor last night. There's nothing between me and Taylor, Jack. It was just a date. That's what he tells everyone. He says intimate with you is wonderful. It was an outright lie, of course. But Taylor was an... I didn't love him. If I could poison his relationship with Betty, I would do it without hesitation. Is he lying? Did he even get a kiss? So you say. Just another case of he said, she said, I guess. Please, Jack, we need to talk. Are you sure Daddy will let you? I don't care about him. Okay, when and where? As soon as possible, and wherever you say. I looked at my watch and said, Village in half an hour. I will be there. I arrived at the Village in first and took a booth in the back. I saw Betty come in, look around, see me, and come toward me. She started to sit next to me, but I stopped her and pointed to the other side of the table. She frowned but sat down on the other side. You asked for this meeting, so speak up. Say what's on your mind and let's get this over with. Could you be a little gentler? Why should I? The woman who claimed to love me and was already planning our wedding directly says she won't wait for me. I accepted it as it was and moved on. Okay, I screwed up. But you could have taken the time to gradually lead me to this idea instead of just throwing it at me. I was angry, and that's why I snapped. I'm sorry. After you got up and left, I realized what I did. It took me a while to work up the courage to talk to you, but by that time, you had already left. I begged your mother to ask you to call me. I didn't see the point. You were pretty clear when you said what you said, so I took it as it was. I don't want us to end, Jack. I really don't. Maybe so, but things have changed. I realized that I was completely unrealistic in expecting you to wait until we could get back together. As I see it, there's no way you would spend 4 years and not make any new friends. You're too good not to attract attention. There's no way you wouldn't go on dates, and the way you had a night with me tells me you can't go without it for 4 years. I can do it, Jack. No, you can't, Betty. The way you felt comfortable with your head on Taylor's shoulder tells me that he didn't even get a goodbye kiss. Jack, it was just a date to get out of the house. That's what you're saying now, but given what I saw, I have no doubt that if I hadn't shown up, the night would have ended with you in bed with him. She started to protest, but I interrupted her, and I have to be honest here, I'm pretty sure I can't go my entire tour of duty without having an intimate. It would be great if it were with you, but the chances are that my holidays will not coincide with yours. They're short, so given all the circumstances, it's probably better that we broke up. You can't be serious, Jack. Okay, maybe there will be some difficulties, but we never planned to get married until I graduated from college. I'll wait for you, Jack. The problem, Betty, is that I don't believe you can do it. You've taken to him like a duck to water. There's no way you can convince me that you won't have a night on one of those dates, which could lead to an emotional attachment that could lead to anything. I don't want to sit around in a year or two reading a Dear John letter. It's better to just leave it for now. No, Jack, I won't give up on this. I accept that I may not be able to go without him while you're gone, but I can wait for you. I won't get emotionally involved with anyone else, and if you can say the same, there's no reason why we can't look at the next 3 years as a physical separation rather than an emotional one. When you return home at the end of your service, we can be together again. I won't ask you about what you did while you were away, and I won't tell you about what I did. We'll start from scratch. Can you agree with that? I could, but I still don't believe it. Still, what do I have to lose? It will either happen or it won't. I told Betty I could agree with that, and she smiled and said, okay, let's get out of here and find a motel where we can catch up on the last 3 months. She got really angry when I told her I couldn't. I have a date with Nancy tonight, and I can't cancel at the last minute. Why not? Because I have to tell her that you and I are kind of back together. Why? What does this concern her? I told her what happened with Nancy, I said. Betty angrily responded, I'll deal with this. No, you can't. I'm the one who told her that you and I broke up, and everything went from there. I'll see her tonight and let her know that the situation has changed. I'll call you in the morning, and we'll see what we can do in the last 2 days of my stay here. She didn't want to accept it, but in the end, she realized that I wouldn't change my mind and had to accept it. My date with Nancy didn't go at all as I expected. It was supposed to just be dinner and a movie, but we never got to the movie. We arrived at Try Cozy, sat down, and ordered. While we were waiting for food, I told Nancy about meeting Betty. She listened and then asked, do you think she can do it? Honestly, no. I don't think she can, but I have nothing to lose by giving her a chance. I can do it easily because I won't have time to get emotionally attached to anyone else in 3 days of vacation or on rare weekends outside the base. It is impossible to build a serious relationship. I will not have the same opportunities as her. After all, you were the first to tell me that she is young and will not want to live like a nun. Then our dishes arrived, and we ate in silence. Nancy refused dessert, and as we walked out to the car, she said, I don't want to go to the movies. Just take me home. The drive home was quiet, and I mentally kicked myself for not waiting until the end of the date to tell Nancy about meeting Betty. When I got her home, I walked her to the door and wasn't surprised that she didn't try to kiss me on the cheek. The surprise was when she asked me to come in. I followed her into the house, assuming she wanted to talk, but I was wrong. She told me to sit on the couch while she went to get a beer. I wondered how her parents would react when they found out she was taking their beer, but that thought quickly faded when she returned to the living room. She held a bottle of beer in each hand but was only wearing an apron. She smiled when she saw the expression on my face. Don't worry, Jack. My parents are in Las Vegas for a week. It's just you and me, and I'm going to give you a good reason to think about me while you're gone and a good reason to come back to me. She handed me a beer and said, Here, drink this while I get to work. I woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee. I got up, put on my clothes, and went to the kitchen. Nancy was there, and she was wearing only an apron. Good morning, sunshine, she said as I walked into the kitchen. I was just about to wake you up. It's a shame you were already awake because I think you'd really like it the way I did it. I can go back and pretend to be asleep. Maybe later. You're already up, and the coffee is hot. The mugs are in the cupboard to your left, the cream and sugar are on the table. I took a mug, poured some coffee, and sat down at the table. I didn't know what to say, and the silence was a little awkward. While I didn't know what to say, Nancy knew. I know last night was a bit of a surprise, but it was something I had planned to do after a few dates and before you left. After talking to you at the restaurant, I realized there wouldn't be any more dates, so I sped up the program. I wanted to make sure you knew you had options if it didn't work out with Betty. I know you don't think she can wait for you, but like you said, you're willing to give her a chance. I'm not going to lie to you, I like Intim too much to go 3 years without it, and I know you can't go 3 years without it either. But I know myself well. I know that no matter who I'm with, I'll spend the night. I won't get into a serious relationship until I graduate from college and start working. That's 3.5 years, and you'll be back home in 3. That'll give us plenty of time to build something. Having said that, I want one more time before I let you go to BTY for the rest of your stay here. I smiled and said, lead me. I called and made an appointment for the evening. My plan was to have dinner and a movie, like last time. This plan failed as soon as Betty got into the car. She didn't ask what I was planning, she just looked at me and said, motel now. I'm not going to waste another minute of the time I have left before you leave. It was frustrating to pay full price for a room we only used for 5 hours, but I ended up getting more than my money's worth. When I dropped Betty off at her house, we had a tearful goodbye and promised to write to each other regularly. I spent a good night with my parents and called Nancy around 8 o'clock in the evening. I told her I would like to keep in touch, and she said she hoped so and gave me her address. Why would I do this? Because I'm not stupid. I know the chances of Betty waiting for me are slim. As Nancy said and then did, she wanted to give me a good reason to think about her while I was gone and a good reason to come back to her. Do not misunderstand me, Betty was my choice, but as a backup, Nancy was definitely an option. The next 3 years confirmed that most of my assumptions were correct. The Army really made sure that my free time did not coincide with the times when Betty would be home from college. Although I had 30 days of vacation a year, I could not take it at my discretion. I could only take it when it was convenient for the Army. For example, I applied for leave after completing my course at Fort Lee, and it probably went straight into the trash can next to the first sergeant's desk. When I graduated from Fort Lee, I was sent to Germany with no chance of returning home. I finished the course on Friday, took the train to New York on Saturday, and flew to Germany on Sunday. After completing my tour of duty in Germany, I was transferred to Korea and was able to take leave coupled with a 14-day en route delay before being sent to Fort Lewis in Washington for deployment to Korea. Betty and Nancy continued to write me letters. Betty's letters were full of school events, her classes, dorm roommates, and other such things, along with the usual I love you, I miss you, and I wish you were here. Nancy's letters contained something similar but also talked about some of our classmates and what happened to them. She also shared details about her dates with me. I learned about all the losers and rare nice guys she wanted to see again, and all the reasons she ended up leaving them. What happened next was my own fault because I didn't write to them and tell them I was coming home. I returned home on Monday, a week after summer vacation ended, and Betty had already left to go back to college. I spent 2 days catching up with Mom and Dad, then called Nancy, who was attending a local community college. Although she was glad to hear from me, she said that she would not be able to see me for a while. I'm dating a guy, and although it's not serious, I can't just leave him. I promised to go to a concert with him this weekend, and he already bought tickets. Call me in a week, okay? Of course I'll call. Have a good time at the concert. After I hung up, I thought how stupid it was to come home and waste my time here, 15 days of vacation and 14 days of delay, a total of 29 days, and not much to do. Then a crazy thought came to me. I had 27 days left, and there was no reason why I couldn't spend some of that time going to Betty's. It was 900 miles, but so what? At 70 miles per hour on the highway, and even with a couple of rest stops, I could be there in 14 to 15 hours. I told my mom and dad what I was going to do, and they just said, drive carefully. 16 hours later, I turned onto the street where Betty's dorm was located. I knew where to go because 2 years ago I had helped Bob Fletcher move his sister to college, and Betty lived in the same dorm. It was a little after 4 o'clock, and I was hoping that Betty's classes had ended for the day and that I would catch her at the dorm. I spent the last 3 hours of the drive kicking myself for not calling Betty to tell her I was coming, but I wanted to surprise her. I parked and walked into the dorm, asking for Betty. "You just missed her. She, Gwen, and Judy just left. I think they went to Carlos Pizzeria." I found the address and went there. When I walked in, I saw Betty sitting at a table with 2 other girls and 3 guys. Her back was to me, but I knew it was Betty because she was the only redhead in the place. As I approached the table, the guy sitting next to Betty put his arm around her, and she leaned into him. They kissed, and everyone at the table started whistling and shouting things like, "Get a room," and "Hey, you too, go to a motel." Betty said, "As soon as we finish eating, right, love?" "Yeah, you're right," the guy said, and kissed her again. I felt like I was hit hard in the stomach, and I even staggered, grabbing a chair for support. One of the girls sitting across from Betty saw this and asked, "Is everything okay, mister?" This caused the 3 people sitting with their backs to me to turn and see what the girl was looking at. I saw Betty's face turn pale, and she said, "Oh damn." By that time, I had already come to my senses and turned towards the exit. I was getting into the car when Betty ran out into the street. She looked around, saw me, and screamed, "Wait, Jack, wait." But I started the car and drove away, leaving Betty standing there, calling me back. 100 miles later, I asked myself why I hadn't talked to her, but by then it was too late. I was very upset. I stopped on the side of the road and cried. I don't think I've shed a tear since I was 6 years old and my dad scolded me for painting our dog red. But that night, I cried a bucket of tears on the side of the road. Finally, I pulled myself together and drove home. I drove another 100 miles before I was too tired to continue. I stopped at a rest stop, got comfortable, and fell asleep. I woke up about 4 hours later, warmed up, relieved myself, and hit the road again. Exactly 40 hours after leaving, I parked in the driveway of the house. There was no one at home, so I went up to my room, undressed, took a shower, and went to bed. I woke up at 9 o'clock, went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and then went into the living room, where I found my mother sitting on the sofa reading a book. She looked up when I entered and said, "I didn't expect to see you so quickly. It just didn't work out." She raised her eyebrows but didn't say anything more. A minute later, she said, "Betty called about 6 times, and someone named Nancy called and asked me to tell you to call her as soon as you get here. Nancy Newbert, you should remember her. We went to school together, and she was at some of my birthday parties. Blonde with braces, it's her, but the braces were removed a long time ago." I looked at the clock and thought Nancy was still awake, so I went to the kitchen, took the phone, and called her. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. I should have called ahead instead of trying to pull off a surprise. That doesn't sound good. This is wrong. The reason I called is because Mike had someone die and he flew to Denver. He gave me tickets to the concert. Do you want to go?" "Certainly. How about right now? Are you busy?" "No, I'm not doing anything. Do you want to do something? And don't you dare ask me what I mean. I can be with you in 20 minutes. I'll be ready." As I was leaving, Mom asked me what she should tell Betty if she called again. "Tell her to enjoy her college and I'll call her when I'm free," I said, and then I left before she could respond. Nancy was waiting for me to get to her house and was out of the house and in her car before I could even pull out of the driveway. She opened the door, walked up to me, and said, "Starlight is the closest. Go on the way." She asked me about the trip, and I told her what happened. She said, "I don't like being like this, I told you so. But you're a little unrealistic expecting her not to play around. That's not the point. I've already come to terms with this. I knew she couldn't do without it, but getting hit in the face like that was brutal. In a way, I'm glad. This means I can take advantage of the situation." "And take advantage of the situation you did," she said. When I woke up in the morning, Nancy was hugging me. We showered and went to the village and for breakfast. After we ordered, I asked, "When I take you home, do I have to worry about your dad and his shotgun?" "Dad left town on business, but even if you were here, He understands that I'm already a big girl. But you need to take me home. I have an activity at 10 o'clock that I can't afford to be late for, and I need to change my clothes and grab my book bag. When I dropped her off at the house, she said, I'll be home around 4 o'clock. This was said in such a tone and in such a way that I understood it was an invitation. So I said, I can be here at 5 o'clock. She smiled and said, see you, then got out of the car. Not a good idea, Mom, I thought. She really wouldn't want to hear what I have to say right now. If we ever talk, it will be in the future after I've had time to get over some things. Mom didn't bother asking what I wanted for dinner. Instead, she asked, what do you want for dinner? I have a date with Nancy, I said. She winced but then threw all her thoughts aside and said, try not to make any other plans for Sunday. I invited my family over for dinner so they could all see you. I'll be here, but keep in mind that I might bring a girl. She frowned but didn't say anything. My date with Nancy was not a date in the traditional sense of the word. We didn't do what most people do on a date. We didn't have dinner, watch a show, or go dancing. After a few hours, we went to have something to eat. I told her about the family dinner on Sunday and asked if she wanted to go on a date with me. I was surprised when she said, no, it's too early for me to start meeting your family. We need to move a little further in our relationship before I'm ready for that. This raises a question. How are we going to develop a relationship if all we do is find a motel and stay in it? I'm not going to waste time building a relationship with you until you leave the military. A lot can happen in 3 years. Like I told you before, I know myself, and I won't get into a serious relationship until I graduate from college and get a job. By then, you'll be home. What I'm doing now gives you reason to think that when you come home, we can stay together forever. I want you to think about me while you're here. Another reason is that I'm not sure how much time you can spend building a relationship with me on this trip. I have no doubt that Betty has no intention of trying to make things right with you. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Betty isn't home yet, trying to contact you, or is on her way. I'm not stupid, Jack. I know I have a hard fight ahead to win you over. It's too big a story for me not to believe that you both have a good chance of getting back together. Admit it, love, you have already agreed that she will play around while she is at school. True, but the other thing I've pretty much accepted is that she'll find someone she likes better there and I'll end up being replaced. Enough about Betty. What about the concert? Where is it and how long do we need to get there? What time do I need to pick you up? At the fairgrounds. The concert starts at 7 o'clock. If you pick me up at 6 o'clock, we can probably get there early enough to get good seats. But it won't be until tomorrow evening. What are we going to do for the rest of today? We have a motel room until checkout time tomorrow. We can stop at the store, grab a deck of cards, go back to our room, and play gin rummy. I agree with the gaming part, but it won't be cards, Nancy said. She had things to do with her parents in the morning, so I was home by 8 o'clock. We kissed, and I told her I'd see her at 6 o'clock, then headed home. Nancy was right when she said Betty was either home or on her way. When I walked into the house, I found Betty sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee with my mom. There you are, said Mom. We were wondering if we'd see you this morning. She looked at her watch and then said, I have to go or I'll be late for my hair appointment, and she got up and left me with Betty. Betty started to get up, and I thought she was probably going to come up to me for a hug and a kiss. I said, just stay here, Betty. I'll get you a cup of coffee and then join you at the table. I took the cup my mother always kept in the pan until noon, then sat down at the table and asked, what brings you here at this hour, Betty? We need to talk, Jack. Since you won't answer my calls, I had to come here. I don't understand, Betty. What do we need to talk about? About what you saw when you came to school. You don't need to talk about it, Betty. I had already come to terms with the fact that you had no intention of becoming a nun while you were there. In fact, if you remember, we've already discussed this issue. Then why did you react like that? Why didn't you stay and talk to me? Why did you leave and make me call you? Because it confirmed my fears, and I just couldn't handle it. Were your fears confirmed? It all started when you said you wouldn't wait for me and that I shouldn't expect you to be there when I returned. Back then, I knew deep down that you would meet someone at school and I would lose you to him. We talked, and I agreed with you on how to approach the years I would be gone. I accepted the fact that you would have an intimate relationship, and I could live with that. But the problem is that deep down, I always knew you would have an emotional relationship, and it would all be over for us. Once I saw what was happening at the pizzeria, I knew we didn't need to stay here and keep talking about it. Damn it, Jack. Of course, we needed to talk about this. I'm not emotionally connected to anyone. Tyler is just a guy I see from time to time. It's my turn to talk nonsense. You had only been back at school for less than a week, and the others at this table were treating the two of you like an established couple. This doesn't happen in less than a week. I saw you kissing, and I heard the tone of your voice when you called him lover and when you said that you were going to take him to a room or motel when you finished eating. I also saw that second kiss. There's no doubt about it. In my opinion, it's not possible for this to happen in less than a week or with a guy you only dated occasionally. No way, Betty. You were in an established relationship, and we both know it. Okay, Jack, I admit it. Tyler and I have a relationship, but it's not emotional, at least not in a romantic or familial sense. Tyler and I are in the same boat. He has a girlfriend at home, but he's just like me. He needs a nightlife. When we graduate, he'll go home to Maggie and I'll go home to you. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but I couldn't. Was she going to spend 2 more years with this guy Tyler and not be emotionally involved? I didn't think so. But given the circumstances, I could afford to wait and see how things were when I got home. What now? What do you mean by now? How long will you be home, and what are you going to do? 25 days left. I have enough money, and I thought I could get a motel room and spend a week with you when you weren't studying, but that didn't work out. It still can. I don't know if it will work now. Why not? Because of you and that Tyler guy. He doesn't matter to me. And you? What will all your friends think? They will understand or not. It doesn't matter to me. Okay, honey, I'll do it, but not for a couple of days. I promised to do something for Mom and Dad since my trip to see you didn't go well. It was an outright lie. I had nothing in common with Mom and Dad, but I had to deal with Nancy without burning any bridges. I had a big problem. I had already promised to go to the concert with Nancy. However, when it came to choosing, Betty was always preferred over Nancy. My new problem was how I could gracefully leave the date and still maintain some kind of relationship with Nancy. All sorts of ideas were swirling around in my head when suddenly I got lucky. Betty misread my expression and said, "You don't have to call the motel and get us a room." I wasn't sure how meeting you would end up, so when Dad found out I was coming home this weekend, he assigned me to attend one of his business social events, and I told him I would go. This got me off the topic of Nancy, but it did raise a question. Why does your father think he can force you to do things like this? Because he always did, and I never said no. But why? Because usually, there's a dance group, and a lot of men don't bring their wives. They need a dance partner. Another reason I don't say no is because I'll be working for Dad when I graduate, and it helps me get to know some of the people I'll be working with. There are probably a lot of lonely guys there, too. They usually are. The thought that popped into my head wasn't good. I saw her father's hand in this, but wisely, at least I thought it was wise, I decided not to say a word. Then Betty smiled and said, "If you could pick me up at 8 in the morning, we could probably spend some time at the motel." Like I'd say no, I replied. We moved into the living room and sat on the couch for a while until she had to leave. Before she left, I told her about the family dinner the next day and asked if she wanted to be my date. "I'll do it, but I probably won't be too happy about it." "Why not?" "I thought you liked my family." "Yes, but it will reduce the time we have at the motel. I'll try to make it worth your while until I get to college and get a room. We can get back to it after dinner and social hour." Great. On the way to the fair, I told Nancy about Betty's return home and that I was going to spend a week with her. "These are numbers," Nancy said. "What numbers?" "Just when I thought I would leave everyone to be at your disposal until your leave was up, everything changed. It depends on you and what you are willing to agree to." "What does that mean?" "It means you have to decide what you are willing to do. You said to yourself that you have a hard fight ahead of you." I'm not going to try to put an end to your attempts, but you have to decide whether I'm worth what you want. How much time I give to Betty or not. I have no doubt that Betty won't go back to school and keep Tyler on the line until I leave, and then they can go back to their friends with a profitable relationship. I know she's going to sleep with someone else, so I don't see any reason why I can't either. You can spend as much time with me as you want when Betty is not around, but only you can decide whether you are willing to agree to that. Full honesty, Nancy, Betty will always be my first choice. Only she can end us if she decides she wants someone else. There's nothing I can do about it, and we're done. And you're not the only one. Besides what might happen at school, there's also the fact that her father can't stand me. When I first met him, he told me straight up that I wasn't good enough for his little girl and he would do everything in his power to stop me from becoming part of the family. Betty despises this and thinks she can persuade him to see things her way. He will use his money and influence to keep me away from his family. I already know she will go to work for him when she graduates, and I'm sure he will push her toward promising single men in his companies and do everything he can to introduce her to the sons of his rich friends. It's not at all certain that Betty and I will stay together. No girl wants to know she's the first or second choice. But I'll stick it out because you're head and shoulders above the rest of the guys I've dated. I will do everything I can just to help you remember me. Then I'm all yours when I return from my week with Betty. I'll take what I can get, Jack, and I don't mind telling you that I'll hope like hell that what you fear might happen to Betty actually happens. I decided it was better not to say anything about this. I picked up Nancy and we got to the fair early enough to get good seats, and we enjoyed the concert. We had a make-out session when I took her home, and she was upset that I didn't take her to the motel. I told her I couldn't but didn't say why. I think she probably figured it out on her own. I told her I would call on Monday and drove home. I set the alarm for 8 and called Betty when I got up. Luckily, she answered the phone and not her father. I told her I'd pick her up at 9 o'clock. She waited on the porch, and by 9:20 we were in room 204 at the Starlight Motel. We made love a couple of times, and at noon we cleaned up and went to my parents' house for a party. We spent the next 7 hours socializing with family and friends my parents had invited. By 7:30, we were back in room 204, repeating what had happened that morning. Betty didn't have to go back to school until Tuesday, so we could sleep in a little more in the morning. I took her home, kissed her, and told her I would see her in 2 days. Okay, I know I was a jerk. I didn't need 2 days to go to Betty. I could go right away. My meaning was that I spent those 2 days with Nancy. I took advantage of her feelings for me. In my defense, all I can say is that I really didn't expect Betty to be waiting for me when I came back for good, and I needed a backup. Nancy wanted to be that backup, so I needed to encourage that desire in her, and the best way to do that was to do some of the things she wanted. What she seemed to want was more time. At Starlight, it was inevitable that in the 9 days I spent with Betty, I would meet the people she mostly socialized with, and it was an interesting experience. I was mostly perceived as bad weather, warm and sunny, then it rains for a couple of days, but you know it will soon pass and the sun will shine again. I had never met Tyler, but I saw him twice when Betty took me to a party and once when we went to a pizza place. The looks he gave Betty didn't strike me as those of a guy who was just a friend with benefits. Speaking of looks, some of the ones Betty gave him seemed to say, "Be patient, it'll all be over soon." Otherwise, the visit was good. I did spend a lot of time with Betty. She seemed determined to give me enough love to last until our next meeting. The farewell was tearful, at least from Betty's side, not so much for me, because, as I've mentioned a dozen times, I've already come to terms with the fact that Betty won't be waiting for me when I come back for good. Also, because she will undoubtedly be sleeping with Tyler before I get halfway home, I spent the next 6 days with Nancy and then cut my visit home short, heading to Seattle where I spent the remaining days of my vacation sightseeing in the Northwest. I was in for a surprise when I arrived at Fort Lewis. They told me I was out of shape. I thought, what the hell are you talking about? Because I was wearing a clean and pressed Class A uniform and my boots were polished to a shine. The sergeant saw my expression and laughed. "Relax, soldier, I'm just making fun of you. The order for promotion to corporal arrived before your arrival. These private stripes need to be removed and replaced." I spent 11 days at Fort Lewis and then was sent to Korea. I spent the next 12 months there and was able to spend 10 days in Japan and 6 days in Taiwan on vacation. I had the opportunity to try out Asian girls and became convinced that the rumors were not true. Asian girls do not have side eyes. Perhaps I should have mentioned this earlier, but while I was in Germany, I was able to spend short holidays and weekends in Spain, France, and England, and I was also able to try out girls there. I was able to see for myself a universal truth: there are no bad girls. I was in my last month of service in Korea when I got what I had always known was coming, a letter from Betty. She had met her soulmate and was regretting having to tell me that blah blah blah. I expected it, but it still hurt like hell. 3 days later, I received a letter from Nancy with a newspaper clipping. It was the announcement of Betty's engagement to Bernard Alistair Crumpton. I recognized the name. He was the son of one of Betty's father's rich friends. He was about the same age as me, but I never met him because his parents sent him to a private school in the East. Nancy's letter said that she knew how much I must be hurting, but from her point of view, it was good news. I wouldn't have the ghost of Betty hanging over my shoulder when I got back. I completed my tour of duty in Korea and was assigned to Fort Bliss to complete the final 13 months of my contract. I decided not to take the vacation because I learned that I would be paid for any unused vacation days when I was discharged, and I honestly didn't feel like I had anything important worth going home for. That doesn't mean Nancy didn't matter, but in my mind, she was always the backup option if Betty wasn't waiting for me. That doesn't mean I didn't have feelings for Nancy, but they weren't as strong as the ones I had for Betty. Only God knew if these feelings could develop into ones that would lead to marriage, but the pain of losing Betty was too fresh for me to get over soon. Life took an interesting turn. 6 months into my service at Fort Bliss, I became good friends with Ron, the sergeant first class one worked with. He was a military man by profession and married, and he and his wife, Gail, lived in official housing. I was invited to their house several times for dinner and weekend barbecues. Gail was a pleasant woman with a cheerful personality and a pleasure to talk to. One day, it was a Tuesday, and this is a day I will never forget. Ron came up to me and said that he was being sent on a business trip to Okinawa for 2 months. He added, "I need a big favor, Jack." "If I can, I'll help," I replied. "Gail is a very cute woman, Jack, and there's no way she can go without intim while I'm gone. The service I need you to provide is to satisfy her intimate needs while I am away. Gail likes you and agrees with me that you're the right person for this." I was stunned. A man was asking me to sleep with his wife. I just stood there and looked at him as he continued, "Gail doesn't like to go out and look for random connections because God knows who she might run into, some kind of psycho, serial killer, a guy with 7 different diseases. Our answer is to find the right person to meet her needs from the comfort of our home. How about it, Jack? Will you help us?" I was stunned but not stupid. Go off base, go to bars, and spend money to find someone to sleep with, or stay on base, save money, and still get your needs met? Of course, I agreed. I asked him how it would work, and he told me he was leaving on Thursday and that I was invited to dinner on Friday. Just follow Gail. I was more nervous than ever when I rang the doorbell at Ron's apartment on Friday. A smiling Gail opened the door and invited me in. I handed her the flowers and bottle of wine I had bought, and she thanked me for them. Then she led me into the kitchen, where she told me to open and pour the wine while she put the flowers in a vase. She sat down, took a sip of wine, and laughed. You should see the expression on your face. You look like a deer staring into the headlights of an oncoming car. It's not worth it, honey. Just imagine that you met me at a bar and I brought you home. This is what you would do on a Friday or Saturday, right? We had dinner, and then over a glass of wine, she asked me to tell her about myself. I shared the whole story that led me to enlist in the army and what happened afterward. When I finished talking about the Dear Jack letter, she said, "That must have been a blow to you." Fortunately, Miss Gail knows how to treat such blows. This morning at breakfast, I put you in your place. Don't get the wrong idea, honey. We will only be lovers, and there will be no emotional attachment between us. I really like you, or you wouldn't be here, but Ron is my man and always will be. Our lifestyle is far from ordinary, but it works for us. We both know that neither of us can live without night. For us, intim is the same physical need as air, food, and water. We meet all our needs when we are together, but when he is not here, I know that he also meets his needs just like I do. So, are we okay? I'm here, aren't I? I said. Good guy. See you tonight. Dinner at 6 o'clock. Over the next 2 months, Gail and I dated. We saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, and there was no holding hands, hugging, or kissing. We immediately went to the bedroom and had a night. The schedule was set up so that I worked every other weekend, and Gail had a car, so we would sometimes go out for dinner and dancing when I could get the weekend off. I would crash at her place 1 or 2 nights a week. No one cared where I was when I wasn't on duty, and no one said anything unless I was spending the night in the barracks. All that mattered to everyone was that I was at work when I was supposed to be. I think it helped that Ron was on good terms with all the senior sergeants, and they probably knew what was going on. I later learned that some of them had the same arrangements with their wives. 2 months and a week after our last time together, Gail said that this would be our last time. Ron would be back next week, and I needed to be strong enough to give him a warm welcome. She gave me a warm send-off. I admit that although there was supposed to be no emotional attachment between us, I did become attached to Gail. If she had been free, I would have pursued her. The hardest thing to deal with was when Ron returned to duty. It turned out that I didn't need to worry. The old network of sergeants Ron belonged to transferred me to another position so that we would not overlap at work. It became apparent that Ron knew from past instances that the work relationship could be awkward and took steps to ease the situation. It was also clear from the way I was treated by the senior sergeants under whom I worked that I had earned points for how I handled the situation and for never saying a word to anyone about my relationship with Gail. In the last month of my contract, 2 things happened, both on the same day. First, I received a letter from Nancy. She met a guy, and sparks flew between them, and she felt I should know she wouldn't be available when I returned. I wasn't as depressed as I was when I lost Betty because my feelings for Nancy weren't as strong as they were for Betty, but it was still unpleasant. The second event happened just before I finished my shift. I was called into the office and told that I had a call. Senior Sergeant Holmes handed me the phone. Hello? Hello, my love. Did you miss me? It was Gail. Of course, I missed you. Ron was just sent to Fort Lee for a 3-week training course. I'm making meatloaf, baked potatoes, and glazed carrots for dinner. Any interest? I just smiled and asked, at what time? If I'm right, you've just gotten off duty, and it won't take you more than 10 minutes to get here. I'm dirty and sweaty. I need to go to the barracks, take a shower, and change clothes. A stupid boy. You can take a shower here. As for dirty clothes, if all goes well, you won't wear them at all during the weekend. Ron told me he checked, and it's your weekend. Do you think you can handle being without anything with me for 2 days? I'll be there in 10 minutes. I handed the phone back to Sergeant Holmes, and he gave me a knowing smile and wished me a nice weekend. The 4 weeks before my discharge were a repeat of our first time. That first night, I told her I would be retiring in 4 weeks, and she said it would be just in time. I'll leave, and she'll have a week to prepare for Ron's warm welcome. On our last date before I left, I did something I hadn't done throughout our entire time together. I hugged her and, despite her attempts to avoid it, kissed her. I then walked away, told her I would never forget her and the time we spent together, and left. 2 days later, I was on a Southwest Airlines flight home. The Army did for me what the recruiter promised. It gave me a profession and an education. The correspondence course helped me earn an associate's degree in business management from the Armed Forces Military Institute, and the Army education program would help me if I decided to pursue a full bachelor's degree. As for the profession, I was prepared for several roles. My main MOS specialty was supply specialist. I learned how to build boxes and containers, properly pack items for shipping, load and unload trucks, trailers, rail cars, and containers using forklifts, pallets, and forklifts with drum grips. I learned to drive trucks ranging from small to 2.5 tons and semi-trailers. I learned how to warehouse and store things, as well as send and receive cargo. But the most important thing was that I mastered the Army computer system related to the supply department. I learned all its features, advantages, and disadvantages, and felt that with some work, I could adapt the program for civilian applications. In the end, it turned out to be an unrealistic dream because by the time I left, someone else had already done it. Still, mastering the system benefited me. When I returned home, my father asked what I planned to do: get a job, find a place to live, take college classes to get my bachelor's degree, and then try to find a girl to build a life with, and roughly in that order. It might take a day or two, or maybe even 3 or 4. Things at the plant weren't going well when you left, but now business is going great. Based on what you've told me about your time in the military, I think you'd be a great fit in our shipping and receiving department. Do you want me to talk to them? Won't this be awkward for you? Not at all. You will not be under my supervision. You'll be in a completely different department. If you think it will help, let's try it. As for housing, there's nothing wrong with staying here until you get back on your feet. My father arranged an interview for me. I passed it and got the job. It took a week to get comfortable, and then it was as if I had never left the army. I was doing the same job I'd been doing for most of the last 3 years. After being home for a couple of weeks, I went out to a dance at the VFW on Saturday night and met some old friends who were already there. When I walked in, they saw me and waved for me to join them. They pushed 3 tables together, and I noticed something as I sat down. Liz wore a wedding ring, as did Bev, Ashley, Mary Waters, John Miller, Mike Orson, George Hammer, and Tom Bradshaw. The group quickly told me the news. Bev and Mike were husband and wife, as were John and Mary, and Liz was married to Tom. George was married to Barbara Peterson, who joined the group after finishing her shift at the hospital. Carol Finley and Denise Baggett weren't wearing rings and didn't appear to have dates, despite having empty seats next to them. There was a lot of talk about where I had been, what I did, and what I saw, but Carol interrupted it when she stood up from her seat, walked over to me, and took my hand. Enough of his chatter. I came here to dance, not to chat. For the next hour, I took turns dancing with Carol, Bev, Bara, and Liz. When the group took a break, we went back to talking about the places I had been when Betty and some guy walked in. I assumed it was Crompton. There was no room at our table, not that I thought Betty would sit here, so they sat in a booth on the other side of the room. Carol noticed me looking at Betty and asked, "Already experienced this?" I don't know if I'll ever be able to completely forget her, but leaving behind, yes, the memories won't fade, at least not soon. Look on the bright side. At least you didn't have time to put a ring on her finger. Yes, you're probably right about that. Are you thinking of trying to separate them? No, this chapter of my life is over. Time to turn the page and move on. You are sure? Certainly. Why do you ask? I want to make sure I'm not wasting my time. If I take a step towards you, will you take a step towards me? Why do you want to do this? We've known each other since elementary school, and in all that time, you've never shown any interest in me. Damn, Carol, I've probably asked you out 2 or 3 dozen times over the years, and you've always turned me down. That was then, and now is now. So, what has changed? I want to know what is so special about you that Betty warned us all to stay away from you while she was at school. I do not believe it. Believe me, she directly said that she would claw out the eyes of anyone who tried to hit on her boyfriend. Her exact words were, "Jack, anyone who tries to hit on my boyfriend." I do not believe it. I dated Nancy, and Betty didn't do anything to her. That's because Nancy told Betty to get lost and die and warned her that her eyes would be in danger if she tried anything. I never knew about this. So, how about it, Jack? Do you want to try it and see what happens? Why not? I thought I had nothing to lose, and now that I was back for good, I needed to start somewhere. The band returned from the break and started playing. I stood up, offered Carol my hand, and she took it. We danced together for the rest of the evening. Every time Carol and I danced past the booth Betty was sitting in, she would turn her head and look at the wall. I have to admit, I took a perverse pleasure in the thought of ruining Betty's evening. Finally, she grabbed her purse and stood up. Crompton tried to hold her back, but she broke free and headed for the door. He got up, followed her, caught up with her at the door, said something to her, and she hit him in the face before leaving. Crompton waited a few seconds and then left, too. I was human enough to hope that I was the cause of it. Carol and I missed the last call, and I walked her to her car. We agreed on a date for Sunday. She kissed me on the cheek, and I drove home. Our date on Sunday consisted of dinner and a movie. We had dinner at Tri-Eye, and it was wonderful. What made it great for me was that Betty and her boyfriend were already there eating when Carol and I arrived. We were seated so that Betty was practically forced to look at us. The chair she was sitting on faced our table, so if she lifted her head from her plate, she was looking straight at us. I sat with my back to her, so I couldn't see her reaction, and Carol didn't mention anything noteworthy. Betty and her boyfriend left before Carol and I had finished, and Carol noticed Crompton giving us a dirty look as they walked out. "He seems angry with you. What's the matter? Did you do something to him?" "I've never met him. I have no idea why he would be angry with me. It probably has something to do with Betty. I don't know. I haven't had any contact with her since I received the letter saying everything was over between us. As long as it's over, I'm fine with it." Carol and I dated for the next month until one night she said, "We need to take it to the next level, Jack. If you don't have money for a motel, I can pay." The truth was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to take it to the next level. Between work and evening classes at college, I didn't have time for a serious relationship, and that was why I hadn't taken a step in that direction with Carol yet. But I wasn't a fool, and I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to have a night, especially when it was explicitly suggested. This wasn't the first time I had been to room 204 at the Starlight, and this visit was just as enjoyable as the previous one. From that night on, we found a way to be together at least once a week until I saved enough money to rent an apartment. Once that happened, we started spending one night a week together, and then both days on the weekends. It was inevitable that Carol and I would occasionally cross paths with Betty. Although I didn't understand why she looked at us with hatred, I was glad that she was angry about something related to me. Carol and I had been together for 5 months when I realized our relationship was going nowhere. I asked Carol to move in with me, and she refused. "I like you, Jack. I really like you, but there's no spark between us, at least not for me. You're a great friend with benefits, but it wouldn't be fair to you if I moved in with you and then moved out again if a guy came along who gave me that spark." I can't say I was devastated by her statement because I also realized there was no spark between us. Although I asked her to move in with me, I knew I would never ask her to marry me. Our friends with benefits relationship continued for a couple more months, and then she graduated and accepted a job offer in another state. Graduation brought something else. Betty received her diploma and returned home. A month later, she became Mrs. Elizabeth Crompton after a wedding that the Star Tribune called the social event of the season. I wasn't invited. Things were going pretty well at work. Remember when I said I mastered the quartermaster's computer system and was going to adapt the program for civilian use, only for someone to do it first? It turned out that this was the system my company was using. One day, I went into the office to get the documents I needed and found the boss at the computer, cursing. I asked what was wrong, and when he told me, I walked up to him, looked at the screen, picked up the mouse, and showed him what to do. All you need to do is click on the top left corner of the screen, and when the drop-down menu appears, click on Sort and wait for the prompt to execute the command. Do you know this program? This is the civilian version of the program the Army uses, and I worked with it all the time. Why is there nothing in this corner to indicate that something's there? No idea. You'll need to ask the person who developed and wrote the program. From then on, whenever Mel had problems with the program, he always called me. This made me a favorite in the shipping and receiving department, not only because there wasn't a single job in the department that I couldn't handle, but also because I noticed ways things could be done more efficiently and cost-effectively, and I pointed these out to Mel. After being there for just over 3 years, Mel had to retire due to health issues. When asked for a list of potential replacements, he handed in just one name, mine. During those same 3 years, I had also completed a training program and earned a bachelor's degree in business management, so I felt confident in front of senior management, and they gave me Mel's job. Another year passed, and while I was succeeding at work, my personal life wasn't perfect. I was dating enough to feel content, but I never found someone I truly wanted to settle down with or who could put up with my lifestyle. For a while, I ended up in a casual relationship with Abby Devon, reminiscent of what I had with Gail. Abby was married, and her husband was stationed overseas in the military. One night at the VFW, she made a move on me. She told me that Carol had mentioned she should give me a try if she ever got the chance. She was quite direct, saying she needed someone to be close with until her husband returned. I politely told her I couldn't get involved with a married woman, especially one whose husband was serving overseas. She assured me that she had his permission, to which I responded sarcastically, "Sure, I bet." Then, to my surprise, she pulled out an envelope from her purse and handed me a letter. It was, without a doubt, the strangest letter I'd ever read. It said, "To whom it may concern, my wife, Abigail Grace Kazan, is permitted to have personal relations with men of her choosing while I am away." The letter was signed by Gregory William Kazan and notarized. Abby was an attractive woman, and after reading the letter, I hesitated no longer. I went home with her that night, and we spent the evening together. The next morning, I found myself feeling unexpectedly envious of Gregory William Kazan. Abby and I continued our arrangement for about 2 years, off and on, depending on when her husband was away. It would pause when he came home on leave and resume when he left again. Eventually, he was demobilized, and that chapter came to an end. Interestingly enough, I became friends with Greg after he returned for good. One day, while sitting at Bud's bar, a guy I didn't know came up to me and asked if he could buy me a beer. I never turned down a free drink, so I said yes. "You're Jack, right?" he asked. I nodded. "Do we know each other?" "No, we've never met, but we have a lot in common," he replied. "Oh? Like what?" I asked, intrigued. "My wife, Abby. I'm Greg Kazan, and I wanted to thank you for being there for her while I was away." I almost replied with something cheeky but managed to hold my tongue. Greg chuckled and said, "I know this is awkward, but I needed to meet you. I love Abby, and it would destroy me to lose her. It could have happened if she'd met the wrong guy while I was gone." I asked him why he was so sure she would meet someone, and he explained that Abby had been upfront with him. She had told him she wasn't going to be without intimacy while he was deployed, and he'd accepted that if he enlisted, it would come with the territory. Greg shared how, a year after their wedding, he lost his job and couldn't find work for a long time. In the end, he decided to join the army to learn a new trade and take advantage of educational opportunities. Abby had been against it, but eventually, he convinced her. She had made it clear, though, that she wouldn't stay celibate while he was away. "I'm a realist," he said, "and I knew Abby's needs. That's why I suggested the arrangement that you and she ended up in." Greg continued, explaining that Abby liked me, but it was never a situation where she'd fall in love with me enough to leave her marriage. She wanted us to remain friends, and Greg wanted the same. "As a start," he said, "we're having a barbecue at our place this Sunday. Will you come?" I showed up, and though I thought it might be awkward being around both Abby and Greg, it turned out to be a pleasant experience, and we even became good friends. As for my dating life, I was still searching. Most of the women I dated were from school, and by this point, many had already been married or divorced. They were often the ones most responsive to my advances. I was still involved in plenty of relationships, but none that led to anything serious. A lot of these women knew Betty and Nancy, and they all seemed to keep in touch. Some even felt the need to update me on their lives. Nancy had married, had 2 children, and seemed happy in a nearby state. Betty, however, was not as fortunate. Betty's husband was a creepy alcoholic who was said to hit her when he got drunk. It was rumored that she wanted to leave him, but her family, especially her father, talked her out of it. They didn't want the stain of divorce on the family name. I always thought her father was a creep, and I'll admit that part of the reason was that he clearly didn't like me when I was dating his daughter. I was even harsh with him a couple of times when he expressed his dissatisfaction. Even at a young age, I realized that fate loved to toy with me, and it turned out that Betty's father would still be a part of my life. Our company was swallowed up by his corporation in a hostile takeover, and I knew that when he found out I was now working for him, he'd be thrilled to rub his hands together and say, "Got you, you little brat." It took a while, but 3 months after the takeover, my boss called me into his office and said that Mr. Gifford wanted to see me at 10 in the morning. "I don't know what he wants, but don't be late. He's very strict about punctuality." I got in the car, drove to the main company building, and entered his office at 9:55. I told his secretary my name, and she asked me to wait, saying Mr. Gifford would see me soon. Apparently, his punctuality didn't apply to himself, as he kept me waiting until after 9 o'clock. As I sat there, I mentally drafted my resume and made a list of places to send it to. Events did not unfold as I expected. He didn't apologize for the wait, but I didn't expect him to. He was a jerk, after all. He looked at me sternly and began, "My people have studied everything in your company, and they don't like what they see in your department." I was a split second away from standing up and telling him, "Go to hell, you an idiot, I'm quitting." When he continued, "It puts our other warehousing and logistics divisions to shame, and they thought we already had a better system. If you have no reason to say no, I'm taking you out of there, making you a senior manager, and putting you in charge of bringing our other facilities up to the same standards as you have at Apex." I was too stunned to speak. I think he took my silence as hesitation or disagreement, so he added, "This will include a 25% salary increase, a company car, a company credit card to cover gas and maintenance, and an entertainment budget." I wasn't foolish, so of course, I accepted the job. It turned out to not be that difficult. There was nothing seriously wrong with the warehousing and logistics of the corporation's other 9 facilities. There were 9 when I started. The main problem was their lack of communication with each other, and that was easy to fix. But in doing so, I ran into the biggest challenge, which I called the wall. The wall was the attitude of, "We've always done it this way, it works great, and there's no reason to change." I had to fire several people who resisted every change I made. This sent the message that things were going to be done my way now, and the resistance disappeared. The communication problem stemmed from the fact that the sites all had different computer systems, so they couldn't talk to each other and didn't have a clear idea of what they were doing or what they needed. The first thing I did was implement the same computer system across all sites, the one we had at Apex. The beauty of this system was that it linked to other departments, especially purchasing. Previously, if Site A needed 300 units of an item, they would contact multiple suppliers, get the best price, and place an order. Now, if Site A needed 300 units, they would log in, see that Site D made that part, and make an internal request. This saved the company a lot of money. It might sound ridiculous that a corporation with a full staff of CPAs and senior executives hadn't figured this out before I arrived, but it was true, or maybe someone did figure it out, but their superiors blocked it because they didn't want to give up control of their little kingdoms. I didn't have that problem because I had Mr. Gifford, the big boss, backing me. Like I said, it wasn't difficult, but it took time. Implementing the computer system and changing some processes to work with it took almost 9 months to get all 12 facilities in order. There were 12 by the time I finished. However, the system began showing positive financial results within the first 3 months after installation. As I went from site to site doing my job, I inevitably had to visit the facility where Betty was working. She had gone to work for her father after graduating, and I wasn't prepared for the moment when I finally saw her. I was walking down the corridor when she came out of an office and turned in my direction. Our eyes met, and I saw the shock on her face. She quickly returned to the office she had just left. For a second, I thought about following her, but I quickly decided that nothing good would come of it, and it might end in trouble, so I continued on my way. I didn't see her again on subsequent visits. In my new role as logistics support manager, I began receiving invitations to corporate events. Usually, these were cocktail parties for clients and suppliers, but sometimes they were promotional dinners or awards ceremonies. It was at one of these ceremonies that my life changed again. It should be noted that I wasn't particularly fond of such events, but as a member of management, I had to attend them. Sometimes you could avoid them if you had a good reason, but for this event, I received direct instructions to attend from Mr. Gifford himself. The event was scheduled for a Wednesday evening, and when I arrived at my office on Tuesday, I had a message to call Mr. Gifford as soon as I got in. I did so, and his secretary immediately connected me with him. He got straight to the point. "I need you to be at the ceremony tomorrow, so don't try to avoid it. I know you don't like these types of events, but I need you to be at this one." "Fine." "Yes, sir. I'll be there," I replied. When I arrived at the banquet hall at the Hilton, I knew that seating was usually unassigned at these events, except for the main table where all the bosses sat. I took a seat at the back of the room. Mira, Mr. Gifford's assistant, entered the hall, saw me, and hurried toward me. "You can't sit here, Mr. Bailey," she said. There was no way she could have called me Jack. "You must sit at the main table." She took my hand and literally pulled me out of my seat, leading me to the main table. Sure enough, there was a sign with my name on it. Mara actually sat me down and told me not to leave, promising she'd be back soon. A few minutes later, she returned with my usual drink, a large vodka tonic with a slice of lime, and set it in front of me. I took a sip and asked, "Well, Mara, tell me what's going on here?" "All I know is that the boss told me to make sure you sit where he wants you, and that's here." She walked away to take care of other things, leaving me to sit and wonder what was going on. Soon, the room began to fill up, and others who usually sat at the main table began to take their seats. I received a few "what are you doing here" looks, which was exactly what I was asking myself. I noticed that the seats to my right and left remained empty. Then, the mystery was solved. Mr. Gifford entered the hall with his wife, Annabelle, and daughter, Elizabeth, Betty. Annabelle sat to my left, and Betty to my right. The mystery of the seating arrangement was solved, only for more questions to arise. What was Mr. Gifford up to? I looked at Betty's mother, then at Betty herself, and back at her mother. Annabelle smiled at me, patted my leg, and said, "Yes, Jack, you were set up." My face must have expressed complete confusion because Mrs. Gifford laughed and said, "Wipe that stupid look off your face, young man. You should have known that Jasper arranged for you and Betty to start talking again." I looked at Betty again. She shrugged and said, "I'm just as surprised as you. I didn't even know you'd be here." I wasn't going to go, but Mom and Dad insisted. "What will your husband say?" I asked. She raised her left hand, and I saw she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. "He's in the past," she said. The next question should have been, "How do you feel about this setup?" "It's awkward," she replied, "but I'm really glad about it." "And you?" Before I could answer, the official events began. After all the speeches and other formalities, the wall between our hall and the next one was removed, opening access to the bar, dance floor, and orchestra. Mrs. Gifford said, "Now you're on your own. Be good." She stood up, walked over to her husband, and they were the first to step onto the dance floor when the orchestra began to play. I looked at Betty and asked, "Now that your mom's not around, how do you really feel about this setup?" "It's awkward," she said, "but I'm really glad about it." "And you?" "You just surprised me," I admitted. "A long time ago, your father clearly didn't want us to be together, and now he's okay with this?" "I'm also surprised that you're divorced. Last I heard, your father was insisting you not get a divorce, so as not to tarnish the family name." "Where did you hear that, and from whom?" she asked. I told her, and she said, "That's complete nonsense. The part about Bernie being an abusive alcoholic is true, but it wasn't my father who kept me from getting a divorce. It was all my fault. I constantly blamed myself for Bernie's behavior. I thought it was because of something I was doing wrong and tried to fix it, hoping we would eventually have a happy life. If I'd had any common sense back then, I would have realized what a man he was when he threw a tantrum over the prenuptial agreement my father insisted on. My father was the one who finally pushed me to get a divorce. He hired a private detective who found out that Bernie had a mistress. They even recorded a few of their encounters, and listening to him badmouth me while they were having an intimate finally made me do it. As for why my father arranged this, she continued, I can only guess. Yes, he didn't want us to be together back then. He didn't think you were right for me, and he wanted what was best for me. But a few months ago, I had dinner with my mom and dad at Marco's. I'd been divorced for a little over a year, living with them, and not dating anyone. You were there with Abby, and I couldn't take my eyes off you. Dad noticed this and asked if I was thinking about what could have been. I started crying, got up, and ran out of the restaurant. I've been depressed ever since, and I think Dad arranged it to try and get me out of my blues. I sat and listened, thinking everything over. I was still single, mostly because I had never found a girl who could make me feel the way I felt when I was with Betty. I had approached this twice, but both women were married to men they intended to stay with. Looking at her, I realized that I wanted her, but the question was whether we could be together again. The only way to find out was to try. Do you want to dance? I asked. You owe something to start off right. Some may question whether this qualifies as a loving wife. Are Gail and Abby loving wives? What do you think of our story today? I think that this story was quite interesting in its plot, and that the plot was not banal. What do you think? Write in the comments. Until new videos.